Eric Trump stepped out of the black limousine, his polished shoes hitting the ancient cobblestones of Buckingham Palace's courtyard. The summer heat made his expensive suit stick to his back, but he kept his chin high. This was supposed to be a simple diplomatic visit, but Eric had other plans. "Remember, I'm not just any tourist," he told his aide Marcus, who was struggling with 3 heavy briefcases. "My father is the President of the United States. That means something here." Marcus nodded nervously. He'd worked for the Trump family for 2 years and knew that look in Eric's eyes. It usually meant trouble was coming. The palace staff had been polite but formal during the welcome ceremony. Eric noticed how they bowed slightly to other dignitaries but simply nodded at him. It bothered him more than he wanted to admit. As they walked through the grand hallways, Eric's eyes fixed on the royal guards standing at attention. Their red uniforms were perfect, their faces stone-cold serious. They didn't even glance at him as he passed. "Excuse me," Eric called out to one of the guards near the throne room entrance. The guard, a young man with blonde hair barely visible under his bearskin hat, remained perfectly still. Eric moved closer. "I said excuse me, don't you know who I am?" The guard's eyes stayed fixed straight ahead. His name tag read Williams. "This is ridiculous," Eric muttered to Marcus. "In America, security personnel show proper respect to the first family." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, maybe we should just continue with the tour." But Eric wasn't listening. He studied Guard Williams carefully, noting how the man's jaw was clenched tight. There was something about his perfect posture that irritated Eric even more. "These people need to learn some manners," Eric said loudly enough for several nearby tourists to hear. A few turned to stare. The palace guide, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, approached them with a forced smile. "Mr. Trump, perhaps you'd like to see the staterooms now. They're quite magnificent." Eric ignored her. He was still staring at Guard Williams, who hadn't moved a muscle despite the growing attention around him. "In my country," Eric announced to nobody in particular, "people show respect when it's due." Mrs. Henderson's smile faltered slightly. She'd dealt with difficult visitors before, but something about Eric's tone made her nervous. Marcus tugged gently at Eric's sleeve. "Sir, we really should move along. The schedule can wait." Eric's voice was getting louder. "I want to understand something first." He took another step toward Guard Williams. The young man's breathing remained steady, his eyes never wavering from their fixed point somewhere beyond Eric's head. "Very interesting," Eric said with a cold smile. "We'll see about this." As they finally moved away from the guard post, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his boss was planning something. Eric had that same expression he'd worn before, causing a scene at the French embassy last month. What Marcus didn't know was that Eric had already made up his mind. Before this visit was over, he would make sure these British guards understood exactly who they were dealing with. After all, respect wasn't something you asked for, it was something you demanded. That evening, Eric sat in his luxury hotel suite overlooking the Thames, still fuming about the day's events. He'd spent the afternoon being politely dismissed by palace officials, treated like just another visitor instead of the son of the most powerful man in the world. "Marcus, get me everything you can find about those guards," Eric ordered, loosening his tie. "I want to know their names, their ranks, everything." Marcus looked up from his laptop, confused. "Sir, is that really necessary? Tomorrow we have meetings with—" "Cancel them." Eric poured himself a glass of expensive whiskey. "I have more important business to handle." "Sir, these are high-level diplomatic meetings. Your father specifically—" "My father will understand." Eric's voice was sharp. "Sometimes you have to make a point before you can make progress." Marcus reluctantly began typing, accessing contacts he'd rather not use. Within an hour, he had a file on Guard Williams, 23 years old. From Manchester, served 2 tours in Afghanistan before joining the Royal Rail. Exemplary record. "Perfect," Eric said, reading over the information. "A war hero. That makes this even better." "Makes what better, sir?" Eric smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Tomorrow, I'm going back to that palace, and this time, I'm going to get the respect I deserve." "Sir, I really don't think—" "I don't pay you to think, Marcus. I pay you to arrange things." Eric stood up and walked to the window. Below, London's lights twinkled like diamonds. Set up a meeting with the palace head of security. Tell them I have concerns about protocol. Marcus knew better than to argue when Eric used that tone. He made the call, speaking in hushed, urgent tones to various contacts until finally reaching someone at the palace. "They'll see you at 10 tomorrow morning," Marcus reported. "But sir, they sounded cautious." "Good. They should be cautious." Eric finished his drink. "Did you know that in some countries, failing to show proper respect to foreign dignitaries is considered an international incident?" Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Sir, surely you're not suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts." Eric turned from the window, his eyes gleaming. Facts that certain people need to understand. The next morning, Eric dressed carefully in his most expensive suit, the one he wore to important meetings with world leaders. He wanted to look presidential, powerful, deserving of respect. As their car approached Buckingham Palace, Marcus made one last attempt at reason. "Sir, please remember that we're guests here. The diplomatic implications are exactly why this needs to happen." Eric checked his watch. "Sometimes, Marcus, you have to teach people a lesson they won't forget." The palace head of security, Colonel Morrison, was waiting for them in a small office near the main entrance. He was a stern man in his 50s with graying hair and cold blue eyes that had seen too much. "Mr. Trump," Morrison said without standing, "I understand you have some concerns about our security protocols." Eric sat down without being invited, spreading himself across the chair like he owned it. "Colonel, yesterday I witnessed behavior that I found concerning." Morrison's expression didn't change. "Oh? Your guards showed what I can only describe as disrespect toward a member of the American First family." Eric leaned forward. "I'm sure this was simply a misunderstanding that can be corrected." Colonel Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying Eric carefully. "Mr. Trump, our guards are trained to maintain perfect discipline at all times. They don't acknowledge tourists or visitors unless specifically ordered to do so." "But I'm not a tourist, Colonel." Eric's smile was razor-sharp. "And I think it's time your guards learned that." Colonel Morrison set down his pen and looked directly at Eric for the first time since they'd entered his office. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. "Mr. Trump, I need to be very clear about something," Morrison said slowly. "Our guards follow centuries-old traditions and protocols. They don't make exceptions." Eric laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Colonel, I think you misunderstand the situation. I'm not asking for exceptions. I'm asking for basic diplomatic courtesy, which you received during yesterday's official welcome ceremony," Morrison replied evenly. "That's not what I'm talking about, and you know it." Eric stood up abruptly, making Marcus jump in his chair. "I'm talking about your guards treating me like I'm invisible." Morrison remained seated, unmoved by Eric's display. "Our guards treat everyone the same way, Mr. Trump. It's not personal." "Everything is personal when you're dealing with the son of the President of the United States." Eric began pacing the small office. "Do you know what would happen if a Secret Service agent ignored a member of the royal family visiting America? I imagine they would follow their protocols just as our guards follow ours." Eric stopped pacing and turned to face Morrison directly. "I want to speak with Guard Williams." "That's not possible." "Everything is possible, Colonel. It's just a matter of how badly you want to avoid an international incident." Marcus closed his eyes. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of. Morrison leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Trump?" "I'm informing you," Eric said coldly. "My father has very specific views about respect and protocol. When those views aren't shared by our allies, it creates complications. Your father is welcome to address any concerns through proper diplomatic channels, or I can address them right here, right now." Eric pulled out his phone. One call to the American ambassador, and this becomes a much bigger conversation. Morrison stood up slowly, his military bearing evident in every movement. "Mr. Trump, I've been protecting members of the royal family for over 20 years. I've dealt with terrorists, stalkers, and every kind of threat you can imagine. But I've never had someone threaten me in my own office." "I'm not threatening you," Eric said with false calm. "I'm offering you a choice. Have Guard Williams report to me for a simple conversation, or explain to your superiors why American-British relations just became significantly more complicated." Marcus wanted to disappear into his chair. He'd seen Eric bluff before, but never with stakes this high. Morrison walked to his door and opened it. "Sergeant Davies." A crisp voice responded from the hallway. "Yes, sir. Please escort our guests to the East Garden, and send for Guard Williams." Eric smiled triumphantly. "I knew you'd see reason." "Mr. Trump," Morrison said quietly, "you have no idea what you're walking into." 20 minutes later, Eric found himself standing in a secluded part of the palace gardens, away from tourists and cameras. The morning air was cool, and birds chirped peacefully in the ancient oak trees. Guard Williams approached in full uniform, his face as expressionless as it had been the day before. He stopped exactly 6 feet away and stood at attention. "Guard Williams reporting as ordered, sir," he said to Colonel Morrison, completely ignoring Eric. Eric stepped forward. "Actually, Williams, you're reporting to me." The guard's eyes didn't move from Morrison's face. "I said you're reporting to me," Eric repeated, louder this time. Still no reaction. Eric's face began to redden. "Do you hear me, soldier?" Morrison cleared his throat. "Mr. Trump, Guard Williams is following proper protocol. He reports to the chain of command, which runs through me." "Well then, Colonel, order him to acknowledge me properly." Morrison was quiet for a moment, then said, "Guard Williams, Mr. Trump would like to speak with you." Williams turned his head slightly toward Eric, waiting. Eric straightened his shoulders and put on his most authoritative voice. "Guard Williams, I am Eric Trump, son of the President of the United States. When I speak to you, the proper response is to salute and address me as sir. Is that understood?" Williams looked at Morrison, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "I'm afraid I don't understand the question, sir," Williams said to Morrison. Eric's carefully constructed plan was starting to crumble, but he wasn't ready to give up yet. Eric's face flushed deep red as he realized Guard Williams was still refusing to acknowledge him directly. The peaceful garden setting made the tension feel even more surreal. "This is unacceptable," Eric snapped, turning to Morrison. "Colonel, I'm ordering you to instruct your guard to show proper respect." Morrison's expression remained neutral, but his eyes had grown colder. "Mr. Trump, you seem to be confused about something fundamental. You cannot give orders to British military personnel." "I can when basic diplomatic protocol is being violated." Eric pulled out his phone again. "Perhaps the American ambassador needs to hear about this immediately." Marcus finally found his voice. "Sir, please, let's just return to the hotel and—" "Stay out of this, Marcus." Eric kept his eyes locked on Morrison. "Colonel, last chance. Have your guards salute me properly, or this becomes a much bigger problem." Williams stood perfectly still, but Eric noticed the slightest tightening around his eyes. The young guard was listening to every word. Morrison took a step closer to Eric. "Mr. Trump, let me explain something to you. Guard Williams has served his country with honor in Afghanistan. He's earned the right to follow British military protocol, not yours." "His service doesn't matter here," Eric shot back. "What matters is showing appropriate respect to representatives of America's first family." For the first time, Williams' composure cracked slightly. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Morrison caught the subtle change immediately. "Guard Williams, you're dismissed." "Actually, he's not dismissed," Eric interjected. "We're not finished here." Williams looked between Morrison and Eric, confusion flickering across his disciplined features. "Guard Williams," Morrison said firmly, "return to your post." "Belay that order," Eric commanded in his most authoritative voice. Williams froze, caught between conflicting commands from two men who both seemed to expect obedience. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. A tourist group's laughter echoed from somewhere across the gardens, making the standoff feel even more absurd. Finally, Williams spoke, addressing Morrison. "Sir, requesting clarification on orders." Eric exploded. "I just gave you an order. I told you to stay put." Williams' training kicked in. He turned slightly toward Eric, his face a mask of professional courtesy. "Sir, with respect, I take orders from the British chain of command, and I'm telling you that your chain of command needs to respect mine." Eric stepped closer to Williams, invading his personal space. "Do you understand who my father is? Do you understand what that means?" Williams remained at attention, but something flickered in his eyes that made Morrison tense. "Sir," Williams said carefully, "I understand that you are a visitor to our country." The word visitor hit Eric like a slap. "I am not just a visitor, I am the son of the President of the United States, and you will salute me when I address you." "Mr. Trump," Morrison warned, "you need to step back." But Eric was beyond listening to warnings. He pointed directly at Williams. "I'm giving you a direct order, soldier. Salute me. Now." Williams looked straight ahead, his face stone cold again. "Sir, I respectfully decline." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Eric had pushed for this moment, demanded this confrontation, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure what to do with it. Marcus grabbed Eric's arm. "Sir, we should leave now. Please." Eric shook him off. "No. This ends here." He turned back to Williams. "Guard, you have exactly 10 seconds to salute me, or I'm calling the American ambassador and filing a formal diplomatic indictment." Williams didn't move. Morrison stepped between them. "Mr. Trump, this conversation is over."
It's over when I say it's over.
Eric's voice echoed across the garden. "I didn't come to London to be disrespected by some nobody in a costume." That was the moment everything changed. Williams' head snapped toward Eric, his professional mask slipping for just an instant. Morrison saw it and immediately stepped closer to his guard. "Guard Williams, return to your post immediately," Morrison ordered. But Williams was no longer looking at Morrison. He was staring directly at Eric, and for the first time since this confrontation began, Eric felt a chill of uncertainty. "Did you just call me a nobody?" Williams asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a threat, and Eric suddenly realized he might have pushed too far. The change in Guard Williams was subtle but unmistakable. His perfect military posture remained intact, but something dangerous had awakened behind his eyes. Eric, who had been so focused on demanding respect, suddenly found himself facing something he hadn't expected: genuine anger from a trained soldier. "I asked you a question," Williams said, his voice still controlled but carrying an edge that made Morrison step closer. Eric, caught off guard by the shift in dynamics, tried to maintain his authority. "I called you what you are, a palace decoration who needs to learn his place." Morrison moved between them immediately. "Guard Williams, stand down." But Williams wasn't backing down anymore. "Sir, with respect, this gentleman just insulted my service and my uniform." "I insulted your attitude," Eric corrected, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Your refusal to show basic courtesy to who?" Williams cut him off, still addressing Morrison, but his words clearly meant for Eric. "To someone who thinks his father's job makes him important in my country." Eric's face went white, then red. "How dare you?" "Mr. Trump," Morrison said sharply, "this ends now." But Eric was too angry to think clearly. "No, Colonel, let him talk. Let this soldier explain why he thinks he can disrespect the son of the President of the United States." Williams finally turned to face Eric directly, and what Eric saw in those eyes made him take an involuntary step backward. This wasn't the stone-faced guard from yesterday. This was a combat veteran who had been best past his breaking point. "Sir," Williams said with deadly calm, "I've served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I've lost friends protecting the freedom that allows you to stand here and make demands. But here's what you don't seem to understand. Your father's office doesn't make you my commander." The words hit Eric like physical blows. He'd expected compliance, maybe fear. He hadn't expected to be lectured by someone he considered beneath him. "My father is the leader of the free world," Eric sputtered. "That means something everywhere, including here." "Your father is the President of America," Williams replied. "This is Britain. Here you're just another tourist with an attitude problem." Marcus grabbed Eric's arm again, harder this time. "Sir, we need to leave. Now." But Eric was beyond reason. The humiliation of being dressed down by a guard in front of witnesses, was more than his ego could handle. "I want him disciplined," Eric demanded, turning to Morrison. "I want him removed from duty for insubordination." Morrison's expression had grown granite hard. "Mr. Trump, Guard Williams has shown remarkable restraint considering your behavior." "My behavior?" Eric's voice cracked with indignation. "I came here expecting basic diplomatic courtesy and instead got—" "You got exactly what every other visitor gets," Morrison interrupted. The problem is that you expected special treatment based on who your father is. Because that's how the world works. Eric exploded. Respect flows from power, and whether you like it or not, my family has power. William spoke again, his voice cutting through Eric's rant like a blade. Sir, power that has to be demanded isn't really power at all. The observation was so calm, so devastatingly accurate, that it left Eric speechless for a moment. Morrison seized the opportunity. Guard Williams, escort our guests to the main gate. Actually, Eric said, finding his voice again, I'm not leaving until this soldier salutes me properly. The standoff was complete now. Eric stood in the middle of the garden, red-faced and trembling with rage, demanding something that everyone else knew he would never get. Williams remained at attention, no longer stone-faced but clearly prepared for whatever came next. Morrison watched both men carefully, his hand resting casually near his radio. Sir, Williams said finally, if you're waiting for me to salute you, you're going to be waiting a very long time. Eric's hands clenched into fists. We'll see about that. Marcus felt the situation spiraling completely out of control. In all his time working for the Trump family, he'd never seen Eric this close to doing something truly stupid. Sir, Marcus pleaded, please think about what you're doing. But Eric wasn't thinking anymore. He was operating on pure ego and wounded pride, and that combination was about to make him do something that would change everything. Eric stood in the garden, his expensive suit wrinkled from tension, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. He could feel the situation slipping away from him, but his pride wouldn't let him ave away without getting what he'd come for. Fine, he said, pulling out his phone. If this is how you want to play it, then we'll make this official. Morrison watched Eric's fingers move across the phone screen. Mr. Trump, think carefully about what you're doing. I am thinking, Eric replied, not looking up from his phone. I'm thinking about how this is going to look in tomorrow's headlines. British Royal Guard refuses to show respect to American First Family. Williams remained at attention, but Eric could see the tension in his shoulders. The young guard was clearly struggling with the unprecedented situation. Eric found the contact he was looking for and held up his phone. One call to the American ambassador, and this becomes an international incident. Is that really what you want, Colonel? What I want, Morrison replied evenly, is for you to understand that threatening British military personnel on British soil is not going to end well for you. Eric laughed, but it sounded forced. Are you threatening me now, Colonel? I'm informing you, Mr. Trump. Just like you were informing me earlier. The tension was so thick, Marcus felt like he could barely breathe. He watched Eric's thumb hover over the phone screen, knowing that making that call would cross a line they couldn't uncross. Sir, Marcus whispered urgently, your father specifically said to avoid any diplomatic complications during this trip. Eric's thumb paused. For a moment it seemed like reason might prevail. Then Williams spoke again. Sir, if you're going to make that call, perhaps you should consider what you're going to tell them about why this situation started. Eric's head snapped up. What did you say? Williams looked directly at him for the first time since their confrontation began. I said maybe you should think about what story you're going to tell when they ask why you demanded that a British soldier salute you. Because that's what soldiers do, Eric shouted. They salute important people. They salute their superiors in their own military, Williams replied calmly. You're not in my military, sir. The simple logic of it hit Eric like a cold splash of water. For the first time he began to realize how this would actually look to outside observers, an American civilian demanding military honors from foreign soldiers. But his pride wouldn't let him back down now. I don't care about your technicalities, Eric said, his voice rising again. I care about respect, and you will show it to me. He took a step closer to Williams, close enough that Morrison tensed and placed his hand on his radio. Guard Williams, Eric said with deadly quiet. I am giving you one final order. Salute me now or I make that phone call and end your career. Williams didn't flinch. If anything, he seemed to grow calmer as the threat escalated. Sir, Williams said, with all due respect, you can't end my career. You're not my commander, you're not my superior, and you're not my countryman. You're just an angry tourist who thinks his last name makes him special. The words hit Eric like physical blows. In his world, his name did make him special. It opened doors, commanded respect, got him access that others could only dream of. But here in this garden facing this soldier, his name meant nothing. Morrison stepped forward. "Mr. Trump, this conversation is over. Security will escort you to the exit." "No," Eric said firmly. "I'm not leaving until I get what I came for." He raised his phone again, his thumb hovering over the call button. "Last chance, Colonel. Have your guards salute me, or I make this call." Morrison and Williams exchanged a look that Eric couldn't interpret. Then Morrison nodded slightly. Williams came to an even more rigid attention, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Eric smiled triumphantly. Finally, he was getting through to them. "That's better," he said. "Now, Guard Williams, you will render a proper military salute and address me as Sir." Williams raised his right hand slowly, and Eric's smile grew wider. Victory at last. But as Williams's hand reached shoulder height, something in his posture made Eric realize that this wasn't going to be the kind of salute he was expecting. Williams' hand stopped at shoulder height, but instead of completing the salute Eric expected, he slowly lowered it back to his side. The movement was deliberate, unmistakably intentional, and completely devastating to Eric's authority. "What are you doing?" Eric demanded. "I said salute me." Williams looked directly at him with steady, unflinching eyes. "Sir, I cannot salute someone who has not earned it." The words hung in the air like a final judgment. Eric stared at the young guard, his mouth opening and closing without sound as the full impact hit him. Morrison stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of final authority. "Mr. Trump, you have just witnessed something that your money and your father's position cannot buy. Genuine respect. Guard Williams has shown you more courtesy than you deserve by even acknowledging your presence." Eric's phone trembled in his hand. The call to the ambassador suddenly seemed like a very stupid idea. How would he explain demanding military honors from a foreign soldier? How would he justify threatening international relations over a salute? "This isn't over," Eric said weakly. But everyone could hear that it was. Williams spoke one final time, his voice calm and measured. "Sir, you came here expecting respect based on who your father is, but respect isn't inherited. It's earned through actions, through service, through how you treat others. You've shown me nothing today that earns my respect or my salute." The simple truth of it was crushing. Eric had spent his entire life trading on his father's name, his father's achievements, his father's power, but here, confronted by someone who had actually served his country, actually earned his position through merit and sacrifice, Eric's borrowed authority crumbled to dust. Marcus gently took Eric's arm. "Sir, please, let's go." This time, Eric didn't resist. He let Marcus guide him away from Williams, away from Morrison, away from the scene of his complete humiliation. As they walked through the palace corridors toward the exit, Eric could feel the eyes of staff members and tourists following them. Word would spread quickly through the palace, then beyond. By evening, everyone would know about the American who demanded a salute and was refused. At the main gate, Morrison appeared one final time. "Mr. Trump, a word of advice. In the future, when you visit other countries, remember that you're a guest. Guests don't make demands, they show gratitude." Eric wanted to say something cutting, something that would restore his dignity, but the words wouldn't come. He simply nodded and walked through the gate toward his waiting car. Inside the limousine, Marcus sat quietly as Eric stared out the window at the passing London streets. The silence stretched between them until Eric finally spoke. "That guard," Eric's voice was barely above a whisper. "Sir." He was right, wasn't he? Eric turned from the window, and Marcus was shocked to see genuine uncertainty in his eyes. About respect being earned, Marcus chose his words carefully. "Sir, perhaps this experience offers an opportunity for reflection." Eric nodded slowly, then pulled out his phone and did something that surprised Marcus. He deleted the ambassador's number from his recent calls. "Marcus," Eric said quietly, "when we get back to the hotel, cancel all my appointments for the rest of the trip." "Sir? I need to think about some things." Eric looked out the window again, as Buckingham Palace disappeared behind them, about what it means to actually earn something instead of just expecting it. The car drove on through London traffic, carrying Eric away from his failed power play and toward what might possibly be the beginning of wisdom. Behind them, Guard Williams had already returned to his post, standing watch with the same perfect discipline he'd shown before a spoiled American had tried to make him bow. In the end, Eric had learned something valuable, though not what he'd intended. He'd learned that there are some things, respect, honor, dignity, that money can't buy and names can't command. They have to be earned, one action at a time, one choice at a time. And for the first time in his life, Eric Trump began to understand the difference between power and authority, between privilege and respect, between what you can demand and what you must earn. The lesson had cost him his pride, but perhaps it was worth the price.